Hi, I'm Sarah Whorf. This is part 2 of making a face, a Pochoir project. In this video, I'm going to show you printing and printing your stencils, hand stenciling, all different ways you can use your stencils to create prints that have color variation and variation in how you use the stencils. I want to show you my setup. You need a sturdy table, good lighting, and some way to cover and protect the table. It also helps a lot, like I have a cutting mat underneath here, so I have a nice flat sort of padded surface right here for where I'm going to be doing my stenciling. So be sure you have an area that has sort of clean paper, newsprint or something here, but that it isn't overlapped or edges, because that will show. So nice and smooth surface. You're going to need your print paper. You're going to be printing on 9x12 paper, so you don't need to cut down your paper. You're required to turn in 3 finished prints at the end that each are using at least 4 of your stencils or a lot more. So how many prints should I be working on to get 3 really good ones at the end that show good color variation and good variation in how I use the stencils? For me, I would say that I would have at least 6 pieces of paper going. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. So I just right there tore off 7, so I'm going to work on 7 different pieces. You need something to stencil with. This pack you can get at Dollar Tree has these stencil sponges. They call them sponge dabbers. These are great. You probably want 2 packs of them so you can have multiple colors going. They also sell this little stencil brush, or you could use other flat brushes or even bristle brushes to use for that. Again, you don't need as many as I have, but if you've got at least 2 sets of these and maybe 1 or 2 brushes, that would be really good to save you from cleaning all the time. If you have trouble finding these, you could use sponge brushes. Those will work. And if you can't find that, you could even use cosmetic wedges or makeup sponges, and they will work just fine. Any sort of plastic sponge is really great for this. I also have some tape. I'll explain why in a few minutes. Rags. So these are just t-shirts cut up to about hand size. That's what I do. Whatever size will suit you. You need a good stack of those. I use these for cleaning my hands while I'm working, and we can also use them for cleaning the stencils. Think about where you could rinse these out and hang them up to dry. If you don't have a good space for that, and that would be really annoying and uncomfortable to do, then you might want to use paper towels. And then we're going to use the Cranfield Caligo Safe Wash inks. Some of you may get relief inks, some of you may have the etching inks. Either one are totally fine for this process. And you need a putty knife, at least one of these, to help you mix ink. Also up here, I have a dog bowl, but it could be a plastic bowl. This is from, again, Dollar Tree, with about half full with water and a really good squirt of dish detergent. This is oil-based ink. That's soap and water cleanup, so I want to have that on hand. Another thing you need for your setup is you need something to put the ink out on, and something washable. So it could be a piece of glass, could be the acrylic piece that you guys got mailed, or it could be my new favorite thing for printing at home. These are just 2 placemats from Dollar Tree. Bought ones that are white on the back and smooth, and I just taped them down to my table so they won't move around. And for stenciling, I'm going to use one side as my palette to mix my colors, and then I'm going to use this other side as a side to start pouncing with my sponges and get down to really small amounts of ink. I've put out a really small amount of ink. I have white, yellow, light orange, burnt sienna, blue, red, so primaries, and a black. And I am going to start printing by doing my, main head stencil. So I want something really light. I want to print light to dark. So I'm going to mix some really light colors. I'm not at all going to worry about any sort of naturalistic color, because what I want to see from you guys is all different versions. So there's no reason you couldn't have gray skin color or any other skin color, bright red or whatever. So I'm gonna mess it, but I want to print light to dark. That's way too dark. So I'm just gonna take a teeny bit of black, mix it in this white. Just have some really light colors. The reason we want to print light to dark, a few things. This is oil-based ink, so this will stay usable for hours. You could print all day with this ink out on here. It's not going to dry on you. The other thing though is it's not going to dry on your prints very quickly. So I really recommend that not only you print with really, really light levels of ink, which I'll show you, but that you think about 2 printing sessions. One printing session to lay in the base shapes of your stencils and then maybe letting them dry overnight, and then you come back and you print again a second time. Otherwise, this over printing all in one day, it's really easy to get ink coming back up on the back of stencils, and that can be moved around. Also, you could muddy your colors a bit, so think about 2 different inking sessions. So printing light to dark will also facilitate not having to try to come in and print something really light across on top of something really dark, which will be difficult to do in the amount of time you guys have to print, in the amount of time that you don't have for these to dry. Okay, what I'm going to do first here after I've mixed my color is I'm just going to charge up some of my sponge daubers here and just take a very small amount of ink, and actually I'm just going to, see, I can barely see it, kind of distribute it really, really lightly and evenly across there. Same with this. I want hardly any ink on my dauber. So I want really subtle color. You want everything to be really dry. I want my sponges to be dry, my paper to be dry, all that stuff, because again, this is washable ink. If there was any wetness here, you're going to get a whole lot of watery ink, which is going to go underneath the stencils. Okay, so just really, really light amount. I'm also going to take, I think, some yellow, straight yellow. So this project's all about variation. So I could decide that some of my prints, I've said this multiple times now, could start with the stencil like this orientation. Some could start like this. There's no real registration here, so think about your whole page. Put your initial big head stencil somewhere maybe center high a little bit. That'll be a good spot to have this. If you've done an animal or a monster and it would make more sense to put the stencil horizontally on the paper, then of course do that. So I'm just eyeballing the space here, remembering that I have hair that goes higher. Okay, and I'm going to start with my green, and very, very lightly I'm going to pounce. I'm hardly doing any pressure, and it might not look like anything, like she's not even putting the ink on there. However, when you look, okay, it is very light, but that's fine. I'm going to build it up really, really slowly. So now I'm pushing just a little bit harder. Just because I have this big open stencil doesn't mean I have to fill the whole thing flat with color. And what I found that I liked with my prints is I liked just having the stencil kind of happen all the way around the edges, and that left me a lot of nice white paper still existing in the center where all my eyes and eyebrows and everything are going to go. Okay, notice again how light it looks, but when I look now you can actually see it on the paper. Obviously, I'm holding it really in place here with my other hand. Being careful I don't do this so I don't get the ink out beyond the stencil. I want to keep my paper as clean as possible outside of my image. Before I lift this up, I really liked having fun adding some blended color, especially to the ears. It was sort of dorky and cute to have the ears sort of look like they're, I don't know, frostbitten or have some other color or sunburned or whatever. Okay, and then I can pick this up and look, and now you can really see, very subtle, but I can definitely see the establishment of my image. Okay, so that's my first printing on the paper. Very subtle. Now though, I want to play around with, making different version. This has ink on it. Simplest thing to do, I think, is I put some tape on it and then I just tape it to the edge of my table. That way it still has some ink on it, but I can still keep using it. I'm going to do another variation. This time I'm going to use one of my brushes that I have. Picking up a small amount, very small amount on my brush, tapping it out on my placemat until there's hardly anything there. And I could come in, again, very lightly, drag it down. What's fun with the brushes is that, especially for hair, so you could definitely get brush marks in there as well as establish the edge of the stencils. And I like how that can look. Again, you can take a peek and see that, yes, extremely subtle, but it's definitely showing. You can, of course, be much more aggressive. So I have more ink now on my brush. I always start with a really light amount of pressure until I can really tell how much ink I have on my brush. What sometimes happens if I push too hard, I start to see, the dowel marks from inside of the sponge. And if I notice that starts to happen, I just make sure that it's repeating itself somewhere. So this started to get pretty heavy on me, so I'm just going to kind of work it in and make it look more intentional. So it looks a little strange with that yellow there, so I think I'm gonna set this back down, trying not to get any ink on the other side. You can of course do this kind of brush stroke, if you will, with the sponge, but you won't get the kind of linear marks, of course, that I got with the brush. When I print this first stencil, I'm just trying to establish where the image is on the piece of paper. All the detail of the eyeballs and everything, that's going to come later. Be sure that you're changing colors with every print that you do. Okay, so I've got ink on this side of my stencil, right? What if I turn this over and purposely let that ink print on that other side? So I'm going to mix myself a different color, and we're just going to change this green into more of a yellow, add some white. And as I'm pushing, I'm also pushing, of course, the ink that's on the other side down onto the page. And to make it even happen even more, you could kind of push. So look, I'm getting this kind of halo of the ink that was on the other stencil. Pretty fun. Now, if you've kept your positive stencils that you've cut out, you could start with the hair or start with something else. So I could put this down like this. I mean, you get it. There's endless variations. I'm not going to walk you through every single one, but I want you to get an idea of where to start with all of this and how to get variation out of using the same stencils but use them in different ways. So on this edge, right, I don't have anything to block my ink, so I'm just trying to be really careful that I'm not getting a hard edge. I just want this really subtle establishment of the top of the head. So beginning to look pretty cool. Doesn't look much like a face yet, but I have this really subtle color, different colors. Looks very different from this one. Very different. Just by flipping over the stencil, using it in the other orientation, you can see the big ear over here, and starting to lay in different colors. Pretty fun. Here's some of the prints that I've finished. You can see that changing the color. Really like this one, how all those stencils in the center start getting really abstract. And then here's one that I really like, and this is kind of what I was talking about, having really heavy ink on the other side of the stencil and then stenciling inside of it, also with very heavy ink. But then the next day I came back and did this really subtle stuff in here and added a little hair kind of mark up there. This print is probably the most like my collage in terms of where the stencils are and how they're printed, although I did move this stencil to a slightly different place and repeat this part to get more hair. This isn't finished, but with this I took 3 of the brushes in my hand, each with a different color, and just, held all 3 and stamped as a way to get started on the image. This one is the first one that I did, and it really is too heavy-handed. Parts of it become kind of muddy and the colors are dark. So I use this as my practice one. So I use this to play around with, again, with the hair and with overlapping. So I don't like it as a finished print, but I use it as my tester if I'm testing a color or something. I really like the combination of this kind of looseness of using the, heavy ink and then coming back in with more control, I think is a really good combination. You can see on this print that, again, I did the same thing, ink on both sides, and I really hogged on the ink with this, so much so that it kind of bleeds through into the paper, and there's probably going to be longevity problems with the paper. But I love how crazy this is. And again, if you want to go crazy like this, fine. But then as you complete it, I want to see control happening. So I'm going to take some white. The white is quite opaque. And so I should be able to stencil on top of this, which is now dry. This has been drying for over a week. You guys don't have a whole lot of time like that for this project, but if you get started early, you could do some crazy sort of background layers and have them dry enough. Okay, so still looking very abstract, but I now have these controlled areas. I definitely will need to go in and print some more. For craft for these prints, it's important that you keep the surrounding paper as undinged as possible. I have a little ding right there, and clean, so that any ink on the page is ink that you've purposely put there. So keeping your stencils clean as you use them is going to go a big way with that. Finding some place for your prints to hang or sit to get dry was the one thing that everybody said was one of the most challenging things about printing at home. So if you have the space and you're allowed to, putting up a line with clothespins that will hold on to your prints, not only do they get them up to the warm part of the room, but they'll be away from pets, children, roommates, anybody else who might not understand how precious these are. To clean up, I would start by putting all my brushes in the bowl with the soapy water. Just let them hang out there. Then I'd scoop up all my excess ink using, again, a magazine page for this, or a phone book if you have it. I mean, I had enough ink to do many, many prints. So don't, you can always put out a little more ink. This isn't going to take a whole lot. Okay, this can go in the regular trash. If you find that the ink is not coming up immediately, you probably need a little more dish liquid in your water. Okay, I'm going to clean this at the sink and come back. Cleaned my sponge daubers really well. They might stain from the ink, but you should be able to get most of it out. And then when they're dry again completely, I can use them again. If you're using plastic putty knives or something, they could go in the sink. These Russell putty knives, which are wonderful, do tend to rust, so I tend to clean them at the table. Okay, when I get to about this point, now it's time for Colgate or toothpaste. Is so inexpensive again at the dollar store. I'm not hyping the dollar store because it's a, environmentally correct, good place to shop, but the fact that you can save a whole lot of money for things you need for this class. And look how it cleans up the ink off of this placemat really, really well. Be sure you're leaving time for cleaning up. The first time you set up and clean up, it might take you a while as you're figuring out where to do all of this in your house and what works the best for you. I really like taking time with cleaning up. I don't really like house cleaning or anything, but I love cleaning up after a printing session, especially if everything went well and I'm happy with my prints. Then it's kind of really nice. Just take your time cleaning, make it all nice for the next time you go to print. Okay, I'll clean that more, but I'm at this stage now where this is clean, and now I'm going to clean my stencils. I can clean my stencils in my sink. Problem is I have this teeny little, like half bath sink, and it's really hard to get the stencils in there, so I tend to do it at the table. Do it right on top of my inking slab. Again, soapy water. And then what works for me, again, using the magazine pages, I can just kind of set them on there. They'll start to dry as I work on cleaning the rest of them. You're going to use a lot of rags, especially over the course of the semester. I used 14 rags today because I was using dry ones to help dry stuff off. So prep a lot of rags, like at least half a big t-shirt of rags. and then save the rest. They'll get stained and dirty and they just get like demoralizing to use, and that's when I throw them out and cut up another t-shirt. Remember, other drying places, you could put prints on top of books in a bookshelf. You could also, somebody last semester put them on a shelf in her closet, noting that it was important that the roommate knew that they were there. So or magnets on the fridge, or places like that. So be creative, find a spot for your prints to dry. Again, this is oil-based ink, and depending how heavily you've inked with them, it could take a day, it could take a week for them to dry completely. So don't stack your prints. Be really careful with them, especially don't slide them across each other because they could smear. You can still take photos of them, of course, for uploading for the assignment, so don't worry about that, but handle them with care. For my students, you are turning in 3 prints. Each print must have the use of at least 4 of your stencils. Each print should be on a nice clean piece of paper without ink out here in the margin areas. Each of the 3 prints that you choose should show very different usage of your stencils. So I chose these 3 because they show very different ways I put the stencils together. Also, your prints need to show a wide variety of color. I don't want to see them all have, say, this same green. They should really look like you have an expanded palette, you've probably printed it more than one session, or you've spent the time to mix different colors. That's really important. Least important of all those things I just went over is how clean the piece of paper is. That's the optimal thing. That's where we want to get in your craft. But don't discount a print that happens to be a really, really good print because there's a fingerprint or ink out here, say. That's okay because that's not a huge grade deduction. Okay, be sure to check on Canvas because I have project submission sample up there that shows you pictures of what you're gonna submit both for the first week and the second week. And of course, check the assignment sheet for anything you need a review of. I hope you have a lot of fun with this project. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with in terms of imagery of a face and also how you use your stencils. Just remember, the main thing I'm looking for here is control of the inking levels and developing a certain sensitivity to how subtle and how light you can be with inking stencils. All right, upload those projects. I can't wait to see them.